It's like this. You know, if my foot was hurting, and I, why does my foot hurt so much? And somebody said, Annika, you're stamping on it. No one would have to tell me how to stop stamping on it. Well, it's the same with this. People say, oh, my feelings are coming from my thinking, and I'm feeling crummy. I'm hurting myself with thought. The minute you see that, thought clears itself, and you're back in the present. But without that awareness, what we're doing is what I call kind of Googling thought. So like I'll think, oh, my weather's coming. What if it destroys, my garden or something? Now, without an awareness of thought, I won't be aware of the fact that then I'll think, well, yeah, and what if it destroys my driveway? And what if a tree falls and it destroys the garage? So when we pull up a subject, when we have a thought, we're basically inviting our brains to give us everything that our brains have on that subject. It's like a Google search. And I'll start feeling more and more worried and nervous. And it'll look to me like that's coming from the storm. You see? But if I'm awake to thought, I'll say, oh, I'm starting to feel worried and nervous. And that's got to be coming from my thoughts. Oh, yeah, I'm thinking all this stuff. Well, the minute I see it, it stops because I'm not doing that Google search anymore. I'm awake to the fact of how the principles, how thought creates feeling in the moment. Without awakeness, thought clears itself. And once it's clear, I'm back into the present. See, that's nature's design. And that's why there's no how-to. There can't be, because it'd be sort of like if you said to me, well, how do you make, objects fall through space according to the law of gravity? I don't know. I didn't create gravity, right? I didn't create the principles that explain how we have experience. But if I'm awake to it, and if I help other people be awake to it, we just basically get out of our own way. And we respect those laws, and we learn how to kind of, put grease on the machinery so that our brains work optimally. It's very simple. If I'm stuck in a feeling or feeling bad, and it's not coming and going and flowing through me the way it does for us as children, then I'm misusing thought, just like stamping on my foot. Soon as I see it, my brain will say, oh, you don't want me to keep adding thought in that direction? All right, I'll clear. And then boom, it's gone. And of course, all the feelings are gone. Now I have a higher IQ available to me to deal with the storm. And I don't have to be walking around making up scenarios that aren't happening. And I could be enjoying, the 8 hours before the storm, being a good parent and getting some work done.
I so often have seen people so caught up in their negative thinking and that looking real to them that they make poor decisions from that place. And in fact, if they really don't know the thought feeling system, they kind of rev it up. Okay, let me add some more ideas, some more ideas. Let me do this, let me do that.
Yeah.
And things get way worse. And that insight that if they just took their foot off the accelerator for a second, they just listened, you just slowed down, just take a breath, just
That's right.
clear the system. But something else will occur, and something else that is really possible. It's really a new idea.
That's right. Something effective. That's the part that is so interesting, is how often people will hear this and I'll say, yeah, and then you can come up with a thought that's actually going to be helpful and actually going to be effective. But so many people have it fused in their brain that worry and stress is a way to be effective and responsible at the same time as they're trying to stop worrying and be stressed, that it takes a while for them to hear that piece.
Yeah, and I think also that this cultural thing that if we have a problem, we have to address it, fix it, the effective, responsible thing you're talking about, that somehow not thinking about it would somehow be lazy or irresponsible, right? And so we have this cultural fusion of our thinking and our cultural sort of belief or paradigm or whatever you want to call it. And it makes me think when you're talking, I can almost imagine one of the couples I work with saying, well, I don't know my feelings. Like I don't, and I know people practice that, right? People practice their feelings. Do you think that's something you have to do in order to have this experience of thought slowing down?
Well, some people do. I mean, some people have blocked their awareness of their feelings for long enough that they have to practice unblocking that. And they've gotten so used to, having a bypass, like as soon as a feeling comes up, they've trained their consciousness to go elsewhere, that they have to kind of untrain that. I do find that that's true. And people come up with their own ways to do it, and that's fascinating. I mean, like, there are people who get that thought feeling thing in one session. And there are other people who it might be a year later before they're aware enough of their feelings for it to really flow for them. I mean, those are two extremes. A year is a long time, but I'm thinking of a man I'm working with in his 60s who bypassed his feelings, his whole life. It took him a while. It all makes sense during the sessions, but in between the sessions, his awareness would just turn off. So, yes, there are people who need to find a way to awaken to that. And it's just like, you might say, well, if you were going to teach someone to ski, would they have to work at it? And, one person might get on the slope and in the first day connect with how gravity interacts with you on a mountain and ski, and someone else might take a year. And it's still laws of nature at work. It's just for some people, their awareness is blocked in some way.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciate about my learning in the principles, let's say the three principles, is just this thing about how unique it is to each person, their journey, right? Their process, their prescription. There's a tendency in our culture that we describe it, and then that description becomes like, okay, so if I have this problem, then I will go do this.
Right.
And I find that sometimes that gets in the way of people really understanding what I'm talking about when I talk about divine mind, consciousness, and thought. Is it sounds like, oh, that's a prescription.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet, the reality of it is the more they understand the design and how it's working, the more insight they get into their own answers.
That's right.
And that relates, I think, to this sort of innate health or innate wisdom. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I can. I was just, I loved what you said about that, that innate design. And, innate design is that basically the principles are working through us, in every moment. And I find that sometimes that I had to sort of learn what a principle is so that I could talk about it to people, because you don't usually talk to people about principles, especially in coaching or psychology. It's all theoretical. So that's a starting point right there is, well, what's a principle?
Yeah, what is a principle? Tell us that.
It's a law of nature. And it's something that preceded us. Nobody invented gravity. Gravity existed, and then one day Newton discovered it. Nobody invented mind, consciousness, and thought. The fact that thought combined with consciousness creates our experience, all sourced by this formless energy, which has a deeper intelligence, has been going on since human beings existed. And one day Sydney Banks had an enlightenment experience and realized what these principles were. And then the art of communicating this to other people became a many-splendored thing. Sydney Banks was very surprised that he thought he would just go out and tell psychologists about it and everybody go, oh, thank God, somebody's figured it out. It wasn't like that at all. Here we are 43 years later, or however long since he made this discovery, and now it's really starting to catch on. Chip Chipman and Elsie Spittle, after they had like 3 meetings of this Three Principles University on Victoria Island, the spring before Sid died. And I was fortunate enough to go to the 3rd one, which he made a surprise appearance at. And he was pretty sick with cancer at that point, so everybody was really surprised, and that he taught all day long. And it was wonderful. But And then afterwards, Chip and Elsie had us do a series of calls. You could call in and they would just talk. And Sid started unexpectedly showing up on these calls, which was just incredible. And at one point, he talked about mind, thought, and consciousness. And then there's divine mind and divine thought and divine consciousness. We're discovering laws of nature that work through us. We learn about it experientially because the consciousness, there's a force to it that's way beyond us. And it's another thing that makes teaching this such a pleasure, because consciousness awakens people. And I have no idea when my client will awaken or how. And it's beyond me. This divine consciousness is doing the work. And so then the client comes in, like I had a client yesterday saying, it's wonderful because she's a psychologist, had a big clinic in New York, and now she's here on Martha's Vineyard, and she's learning this. And she was very anxious, and she did a couple sessions with me, and she came in and said, Annika, the anxiety's just gone. Like, it's just gone. Like, what happened? How could that happen so fast? How could that happen so easily? As a psychologist, she had sat on both sides of the desk, so she knew this was unusual.
Yes.
And it was consciousness. You see, as you look in the direction of the principles, which are philosophical and abstract, you look away from the content that you're usually chewing on and directing your thoughts towards and making thought forms out of. And when you point away, that in itself starts to create some of that open space. And consciousness comes in when there's space, as does mind, with fresh thought. So people gain new awareness, and then they say, how did that happen? How did that happen so fast? So the principles do the work. We just tell people about them.